On a hazy November morning in 1998, Lexington, Kentucky, Malibu Drive, Lexington firefighters responded to what looked like a routine business fire. Minutes later, they found a woman dead in the rear hallway. Her name was Linda Rutledge. For 27 years, no one was arrested, and then a single shell casing broke the entire case wide open. In Kentucky, some stories never get finished. They linger unanswered, unresolved, and often forgotten. This is Buried in the Bluegrass, a true crime podcast from O'Gurg Media. Each episode will dive into cases from across the Commonwealth, focusing on documented facts and those pesky little unanswered questions. On the morning of November 7th, 1998, Lexington firefighters were dispatched to a small business on Malibu Drive. The call came in just before 7:40 a.m. It was reported as a structure fire at the Nixon Hearing Aid Center. When crews arrived, they saw smoke coming from inside the building. They quickly entered. The fire itself was contained and extinguished without difficulty. But as firefighters moved through the building, checking to make sure every bit of the fire was out, they found something far more serious. In the back hallway, they found a deceased woman. That woman ended up being Linda Marie Rutledge, 43 years old. The Fayette County Coroner's Office later determined Linda's cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the head. This was not a fire death. The fire was simply a diversionary tactic to hide the heinous act committed here. Obviously, the entire scene shifted at that point from a routine fire investigation to a homicide investigation. Lexington police took over the scene. Evidence was collected. A shell casing was recovered. As far as I can tell, in all my research, a single shell casing. That's all that's ever mentioned anyway. I could be completely wrong on that. And investigators began the work that would quietly continue for nearly 3 decades. But what they did not have that morning was a suspect. No arrest was made, no name was announced, and for years, very little information about Linda Rutledge's murder was publicly available. The business reopened, the city moved on, but the case did not close. Because even when the file goes quiet, it doesn't always mean the work stopped. After the fire trucks left Malibu Drive, the case of Linda Marie Rutledge entered a long, quiet phase. There were no press conferences announcing suspects, no arrests, no dramatic breaks. Instead, the work moved behind closed doors. Detectives reviewed notes, they logged tips, they cataloged evidence, and then they waited. For the public, the silence was easy to mistake for inaction. But inside the case file, the opposite was true. The evidence from the scene wasn't discarded. It wasn't lost to time. It was preserved. A shell casing recovered from the business was logged and stored. Biological evidence was retained. Paper files were revisited as detectives changed assignments and years passed. This was the kind of case that didn't generate new headlines, but also didn't get boxed up and forgotten on the bottom shelf somewhere. Technology at the time simply hadn't caught up with the questions investigators were asking. DNA testing existed, but it wasn't what it would be later. Ballistics databases were limited. Connections between crimes in different states often depended on luck, not systems. So the case stayed quietly open. As the years turned into decades, Lexington changed. Businesses closed, new ones opened. Officers retired, new detectives inherited old files. But Linda Rutledge's case stayed on the books. Not solved, not closed, just in limbo. And that's where a lot of the cases I cover are going to end. But luckily this one has a happy end, well, a finality, I'll say. Because this one didn't end there. Because evidence, when it's preserved, does not expire. And one day, long after they put that fire out, science would catch up to what investigators had held on to all along. For nearly 27 years, the evidence in Linda Rutledge's case sat quietly, unchanged, untouched by headlines. But science doesn't stand still. Behind the scenes, law enforcement tools were evolving, databases were expanding. Old evidence now can be re-examined in ways that simply did not exist in 1998. One of the tools was a national system designed to do something investigators once could only hope for: connect gun violence across jurisdictions. A shell casing recovered from the Nixon Hearing Aid Center had been preserved all those years. And when that casing was entered into the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, something hit. It matched. Not to another case in Kentucky, but to evidence recovered in Austin, Texas, from a crime scene dating back to 1991. 2 cities, 2 decades apart, 1 firearm. What are the odds? Kentucky State Police forensic examiners confirmed what the system suggested. The shell casings from Lexington and the ones recovered from Texas had been fired from the same gun, a .380 caliber. That by itself was significant, but it wasn't the end of it. Investigators then turned to the biological evidence that had also been preserved from Linda Rutledge's case. In 2025, a sexual assault kit associated with Linda was submitted for modern DNA testing. The result was decisive. The DNA profile from Lexington matched the same offender profile connected to the Texas case. Ballistics and DNA, 2 independent forms of evidence, now pointed to the same person. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, the case had a name attached to it. Not a theory, not a guess, evidence. And once the name emerged, the long silence around Linda Rutledge's murder finally broke. With both ballistic and DNA evidence pointing to the same individual, investigators finally had what they had been missing for nearly 3 decades: a name. That name? Robert Eugene Brashers. Brashers had already been known to law enforcement in Texas. Evidence connected him to violent crimes there dating back to the early 1990s, known as the Yogurt Shop Murders. This was a case out of Austin, Texas, where 4 young girls were unalived in a yogurt shop. There was only a slight problem with this, though. By the time that the Lexington investigators identified him as the man responsible for the Linda Marie Rutledge's murder, Brashers was already dead. He had actually died in January of '99, just weeks after Linda was killed. He actually unalived himself in a completely unrelated police standoff outside of a motel. So there would be no arrests. There would be no courtroom, no sentence handed down. Lexington police made it clear if Brashers was alive today, he would have been arrested and charged with Linda Rutledge's murder. Well, no shit, Sherlock. That statement matters, though, because it draws the line between speculation and proof. The case wasn't solved by suspicion or circumstance. It was solved by evidence, and that could have stood up in proof had it come to that. For Linda's family, the outcome has to be complicated. There is an answer, but no confrontation, a resolution, but no trial, a name, but no chance to hear it in the courtroom. And yet, after 27 years of not knowing, the answer carries weight. Law enforcement agencies across state lines work together to reach this point. Local detectives, forensic labs, and investigators who have never let the evidence go. What they delivered wasn't closure in a traditional sense, but it was the truth. And sometimes, after decades of silence, the truth is the closest thing to justice that's left. When law enforcement announced that the murder of Linda Rutledge had been solved, that word carried weight, but it also carried limits. There is no arrest, no trial, no verdict read aloud in the court. What there was certainty. Evidence preserved long enough to speak for itself, science advanced far enough to listen, and investigators patient enough to connect the dots when the tools finally existed. Solved doesn't mean that time didn't pass. It doesn't mean the loss was smaller, and it doesn't mean the family gets back the years it lived without answers. What it means is this: Linda Rutledge's death is no longer a question mark. Her name is no longer followed by unknown, and her case no longer sits silent. This case matters not just because it ended, but because of how it ended. It shows what happens when evidence is protected instead of discarded, when files are revisited instead of shelved, when investigators assume that someday the tools will catch up. Because sometimes they do. And on this podcast, that's a line we'll keep coming back to. For every case that's solved after decades, there are others still waiting. Waiting on evidence to be tested. Waiting on questions to be asked again. Waiting on someone to care enough not to silence the final answer. Linda Rutledge's story reminds us of what's possible. The stories that follow will ask why that ending hasn't come yet. Okay, that concludes the fact portion. Now I'm going to get into my personal opinion, which I know nobody gives a shit about. Don't come at me. Just don't do it. I'd had a whole different first episode planned, but this one hit the news recently, and it's kind of in the forethought, because we all know in this 24-hour news cycle, if it's not recent, we don't remember it, and it fades out of the memory. And in my opinion, I 100% believe this case faded out of memory. If it hadn't been for the Austin police finding what they found and contacting the Lexington police in July of 2025, they probably still would have this unsolved case on the record. Yes, we had biological evidence, we had DNA, but we didn't have anything to test it against. We had no clue. This Robert Eugene Brasher, the entire time he was actually alive, wasn't even suspected to be a killer, let alone a serial killer. In fact, it's pretty amazing. They've actually solved several crimes just from genealogy. Like Ancestry.com out here, y'all. I'm fully aware that it is actually investigative genealogy, and I'm sure it wasn't just Ancestry.com over here. If it was, that's fucking amazing. But on January 13th of 1999, like 4 months after the Linda Rutledge case, police in Kennett, Missouri, they found a stolen car in a Super 8 motel. And after talking to the motel people, they discovered that it was Brasher's and his family. So they broke down the door and found him hiding under the bed with a friggin' gun. He said said he was going to kill himself, threatened to kill himself, and then they backed off, so he took his family hostage. This asshole took his family hostage. Like, his actual wife, daughter, and 2 stepdaughters. Like, what the fuck, bro? So eventually, like, after a long standoff, he let the family go and then shot himself in the head. And God forgive me for being such a fucking asshole, but he survived for 6 days suffering, and that makes me a very happy person. Now, the lady who actually was a genealogist, C.C. Moore from Parabon Nanolabs, she was the one who identified Brasher through the genetic genealogy. So she should definitely get some very, very high credit in this case. But as usual, Lexington police are like, we solved this case. I think it's very fair to say Austin police had a good hand in it, and the genealogist, I mean, go on. And let's just be 100% honest, luck played into it as well. What really sucks about this case is we'll never know motive. We'll never know in between the killings. Like, we're never going to know the true story here. We're missing a lot, and with Brasher's killing himself just months after this, there's no investigation. There's no way to know. I mean, we're left in the dark. It just, where's the closure? I mean, I guess as normies over here, we're never going to understand that from these psychopaths. I'm not sure if I was a family member how I would take it, but as an impartial person, I'm kind of glad he did what he did. He saved us a lot of time and effort in the court system, but he did take the easy way out. I mean, own your shit, take the punishment if you get caught. I mean, I'm sure there's dudes out there right now running around that's got bodies on them that are never going to get caught, just straight up. And if you don't believe they're out there, you're a very naive person. It makes you wonder how many serial killers or killers in general you've interacted with in your life. I mean, if the stories are true in my family, my grandfather actually killed a person. And it ended up being the wrong person. But he spent time in the pen, and if you met this man, you'd have never known it. Like, wouldn't think it was even fathomable. And then there's a few family members that I have serious questions about. No proof, but serious questions. With that being said, I'm glad this case had I won't say positive outcome, but an outcome. Because a lot of the ones you'll see in the future that they don't get an outcome. They don't get answers. They're still left in limbo and have no clue what happened to their loved one or even the faintest clue as to when they will know something about their loved one. I'm from Eastern Kentucky, well, Southeastern Kentucky, and we had a crazy amount of people disappear. My first episode was going to be on the girl I went to school with, Crystal Marler. This, I mean, it's just where I'm from. It says nothing about me, but this is a very racist county. Like, this is the first biracial chick that ever went to our school that I knew of and came up missing. Like, literally, they did not find her body for 10, 15 years. They found her on the side of the road. I think she ended up having blunt force trauma and gunshot wounds. Like, this girl, we used to all hang out together and have a good little group together. We partied, we smoked, we partayed, as it were. But that was the late 90s. That's what kids did. But in the time I lived there, I know of at least 5 or 6 people who came up missing. And a lot of times, and pure rumor on everything here, but a lot of times they owed money to somebody, drug related, and they ended up on a riverbank and somebody find them a year or 2 later. And I can guarantee you my small little town was not the only small little town with a bunch of secretive bullshit going on. We don't hear about it all, but I guarantee there's a lot of stuff going on that each individual little county knows their own stuff. I mean, look at Whitesburg. Look over there at Letcher County with Mickey Steins and that whole thing. What kind of friggin' conspiracy theory BS? God, what a mess. So those of you who have made it this far, that's what I want to hear about. Send me stories. Send me whatever. Message me on Facebook, oldgurgmedia.com. You can send me, there's places over there where you can contact me, that the same email at Gmail, oldgurgmedia.com at Gmail. Like, if you got stories like that, that's what I want to put on here. But I need provable shit too. We all know how it is in the backwoods. I know my cousin seen this and his mama's baby daddy and they doing this. I actually have to be able to prove this. Otherwise, like, I can get sued. I ain't trying to get sued, y'all. On that note, however, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Make a nice little short one for my first one. Get my toes wet. You know, a little dip in the water. What you doing in my waters, boy? If you don't know who old Greg is, you don't know who old Gurg Media got his name from. But y'all get it on social media. Tell me you fucking hate it. Tell me you loved it. Tell me it's shitty quality. Like, I want honest feedback. Don't sugarcoat that shit. I can handle it. I might cry a little bit, go to my cry closet, but it'll be okay. I'll live. Once again, though, Old Gurg Media. oldgurgmedia.com, oldgurgmedia@gmail.com, and Old Gurg Media on YouTube, TikTok, and it's technically Greg Sexton on Facebook, but you can look up Old Gurg Media and you'll see my ass. Hell, you can look up Lexington Police Department. Guess whose first video? Yeah, that's me. But seriously, thank all 2 of you for listening. If I get 3, then I might throw a party. Look out for that in the future. I'm Old Gerd, signing off. This episode of Buried in the Bluegrass was researched, written, and produced by Greg Sexton of Old Gerd Media. The story of Linda Marie Rutledge was reported using publicly available records and official law enforcement statements. Primary resources for this episode include Wikipedia, official press release and case information from the Lexington Police Department, statements and confirmation from the Kentucky State Police, forensic details released by law enforcement regarding DNA and ballistic evidence, public case records related to National Integrated Ballistic Information Network analysis, historical reporting and official summaries documenting the 1998 homicide and its 2025 resolution. Additional background context was drawn from publicly accessible archival materials and verifiable reporting. Out of respect for the victim and family, no private individuals were contacted, and no personal details beyond what law enforcement has publicly released were included. If you or someone you know has information related to unsolved cases discussed in future episodes, please contact your local law enforcement agency. New episodes of Buried in the Bluegrass are produced independently and focus on Kentucky cases that deserve careful, fact-based attention. Thank you for listening. This has been an Old Gerd Media production.